So there are some non-obvious parallels to working with Bob over the internet during COVID to being thrown in the street with wedding bands, being jostled. I mean, I got hit by motorcycle handlebars probably 4 or 5 times running around after wedding bands. And I didn't even think about it. I just was loving it. So there's something about the immediacy of it and a certain amount of risk. So I suppose for Bob to go that far, he's putting himself at some psychological risk. Fair? Maybe not. I don't know. He's happy with it. But there's something about the immediacy of responding to that stuff that's a lot like responding to the immediacy of what's going on in the street right in front of you. And so doing the music for that, and most of the video editing was Bob's. And I really like the way the thing develops, and that images that might be disturbing, isolated on their own, become a relief from the role of the thing. So I haven't watched it for a year, but I thought let's start at the top or the bottom, as it may be, with this kind of stuff to then work to talk about the wedding band project, because I think there are those connections that are real, and the pressures of COVID were pretty brutal, and I got a ton of work done, and it was a way of responding to that and being in the street with COVID in a way, even though you're stuck in your studio and working with stuff like this. Brian and I did some work online too, where we trade files, and we even cheated on a festival where we pretended we were streaming, but we didn't. It was in Germany, so we felt it was okay. So now to the wedding bands. The way I got interested was we showed up in India in 2009 because Wendy, my wife, had a Fulbright to study ikat weaving. And ikat weaving is not very accessible because it's kind of a closely held family secret in most situations. So we went to Gujarat, and I think, as it turns out, I think they picked MSU because they charged Fulbright less. But it turns out it's really a good place because it's close to a lot of ikat. And it's ended up being like a second home to us because we've now lived there 4 times on the same street in 3 different apartments. And we get there, and one of the first few nights we're out, the wedding season had started. So we're on a street, and fireworks start going up, and we turn, and coming up the street as a wedding band cart, huge echo on the voice, wah, 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 wah. And a marching band that to me looked like they were dressed in Sergeant Pepper uniforms. It's like, it reminded me of the time when we were out walking around in this little temple district that's across the street from us by the zoo, and I encounter a donkey that has pink circles painted on it. And it's like, what, have I just entered Alice in Wonderland? It was one of those moments where something that felt like magic happened, and it really did feel like that. And it wasn't just the surprise of it, it was like a genuine appeal for the combination of the sounds. So the fireworks, with the people dancing, with, in that case, I can't remember the specifics of that band because I've heard great wedding bands, and I heard one which closes out what you're going to see, which may be the worst band of any kind I've ever heard anywhere in the world. and the surprise of that is really bad bands can make great sound design, because when it's teamed with an image, it works. But I saw it and I was just intoxicated by it. And I was just kind of a tag along for this, and I didn't really know what to do with India. And the thing I did wrong was thinking it will just provide because there's so much going on. And nothing just provides. For at least with a personality like mine, I've got to be working on something and engaged in a project. And the first time around, I had trouble finding that. So I kind of struggled with it, but I was unknowingly discovering things that really grabbed my interest and still hold my interest. like, I'm glad that I'm going to get to see some wedding bands in the street, and I'm going to do the same thing as I did 7 years ago and chase them around. And when they start up in Gujarat, when we get back, I still love that. So what happened was, we went to the Fulbright conference at the end of, toward the end of our stay, and the head guy says, and I don't have a terminal degree. I have a master's degree in creative writing. I didn't bother with an MFA program because I wanted to live in San Francisco because of the writing scene there, because I felt that was more valuable to me than the credential, because I knew too many professors growing up and I didn't want to be one. And turned out I ended up teaching anyway for 25 years, but who knows what's going to happen. But he said professionals can apply. So I kept thinking about those wedding bands. A couple of years later, I looked into it. There was only one book, very little coverage on video. Nobody had done much with it. And it's this, I mean, you can put a hierarchy on the quality of the musicianship if you want to, but the quality of the experience is undeniable. It's, to me, just really powerful and a beautiful thing. So I do recommend going to school in creative writing, because then you learn to do voices. So I put on my academic voice and wrote the proposal for the Fulbright and got it. You know, I referred to the right current books on ethnomusicology and my stance toward the music, and I got the project. So I got here, and as soon as the wedding band started up, it was just like, it was like a party. We'd drive around in rickshaws trying to find wedding bands. You know, we'd listen for them, we'd try to track them down, and get in there and just mix in with them. And along with this, there was a series of interviews, which won't show up on here, with the people that were in the wedding. Well, there is one that's on here, one of my favorites, but with the people that own the wedding band companies, and what they'd gone through, all of that. So that's how it got going, and no regrets. I loved the action of that project. As far as the equipment goes, so I bought a Voigtlander, a 25 millimeter for micro 4/3, which converts to 50, so it's like natural vision, and it opened to 0.95. So basically, I could, if I wanted to, I could read a book in the dark with it almost. I mean, it worked really well, and the imagery is beautiful. And I shot that most of the time. Ben was second camera, and he used, and I was shooting a GH3, which was the best Lumix then. What were you shooting?
G6? I don't remember.
G6, I think. And we had an, what was it, 80 millimeter?
I think so.
What brand was that?
I don't know.
An decent 80 millimeter lens, which I'd seen because one of the first people to shoot a feature film with micro 4/3 had used the same lens, so I thought, that's good enough. Anyway, it worked out fine. So basically, all the imagery is on those two. And for audio, I used a preamp with the Soundman binaural. And so all the sound was recorded, virtually all the sound you hear was with binaural stuff. And I had brought good recorders with me too, and nice Audio-Technica mics, but it was so much easier and so much unobtrusive to look like you're just, you know, you're listening to, I guess it wouldn't be NPR here, some old Bollywood music on your headphones when you're actually recording whatever's going on. And that mixed out pretty well for the film. So the first piece I think that shows up here of the wedding band films was a piece of luck, because we were in a weaving village and there was a wedding going on, and it was an all percussion band, and the main player is an incredible player. So I'll play this next. Also, stop me if I'm getting off the tracks that you guys are interested in. And if you have questions, ask those too. So that's the end of the Corona section of the evening, or the afternoon. Is this in the way? went from Surrendranagar to Jodhpur.
One second.
एक मिनट
review is on. I want to know how long has he been playing in the band?
કેટલા વર્ષથી અહીંયા બેન્ડ વગાડો છો? અરે બેસો. કેટલા વર્ષ?
કેટલા વર્ષથી વગાડો છો?
હા, 20 years.
20 years. This guy's really sweaty. I like it that the wind player looks like Muslim Lou Reed. Which apparently, as a bit of humor, doesn't play very well to this room, but I think it's funny. He's one of 6 left playing that instrument. It's in Budge. So those are the clips. Where I went wrong was liking things too much. So there was really no reason to have the musicians in the kind of, what color is that room? Chartreuse? I don't know. The guy with the double reed and the percussion player, by the way, who I interviewed, it was maybe one of the most boring people I've ever met. He couldn't stop talking. Like, but I loved it that he had a ring on his finger that he was using to play the 10. So my own interests overwhelmed my better judgment on the length of that shot. And it didn't deserve that much time. But it was out of passion. So since these are just, it's not finished, I'll not feel too bad about showing it to you, because it was a way to talk about it. Because I mean, part of what I want to talk about is that every bit of that was passion driven. And every bit of that was because I was loving what was happening in those moments and attending to them as closely as I could. I mean, involved in it. It was intoxicating almost. So that it was almost a hypnotic type experience. And zero regrets. And so much luck involved too in finding some of those spots. And I guess which was the worst band in the world? Anybody? Of that group? No, really. Those last guys couldn't play at all. I mean, literally, they couldn't play. The drummer, he wasn't even listening. He was just kind of doing this. And the singer had the echo turned all the way up. And that poor guy with the trumpet had to pour water in it about every 30 seconds to get anything out of it. It was, I mean, I felt sorry for him, but also once the procession was going, I realized, this works. It's enough. And it's ended up, once it's been transfigured by being recorded, it turns into something else. So the experience of it, I mean, I think that ended up being good sound design from rotten music. And I learned a big bunch from that. I mean, it would have been easy to see how these guys were playing and think, well, this isn't going to be worth it. Let's go back and eat dinner. But we stuck with it, and the experiences were good. A couple more technical points. I used, when did Bias go out of business? Or when did they quit? They just quit. Anybody remember? Was it before 2015? I used either Bias or Isotope to clean that up. So I cleaned everything up, and if I were you guys, I'd buy those light versions of Bias when they come out as a package deal, because then you can do almost everything audio-wise, and it won't cost you much money at all. And if you can afford the larger packages, do that, because they're super. I know Brian, he just popped for the Giant, and I was lucky enough to be part of a marketing interview in which they gave me a $500 credit a year ago or 2 years ago. So I got a bunch of stuff that I had some of their stuff obviously before, but I got some more. But those products make sound recorded like that pretty manageable. And listening to it from this point of view, it was fun to hear when it wasn't just a recording of a band, but when it became more sound design, because the more traffic there was and the more interfering sounds there were, in some ways the richer it was. And I think that that aspect of it's important to think about too, and to not worry too much about getting all that getting that out of there. What you want to get out of there is like dry cough. Certain other, like if you are you're getting some fabric noise off of you, things like that. And I know not everybody likes binaural, but I really had no problem making it work as stereo for this. And I was completely pleased with the sound. And those were, at that point, 15-year-old Soundman mics that I picked up in Germany on the way to Tajikistan to teach creative problem solving. That sounds like a good sentence, doesn't it? I wish I had film of that. That was really fun too. So you've got why I did it. Certainly where I screwed up. The piece that was developing before I stopped working on it was a little too much of my family vacation with high-tech equipment and certain obsessions. And I got off base thematically. So I had footage of crocodiles and Sufi. I got invited to some Sufi piercing ceremonies, so I got to have, if they had cleaned those spikes up, I would have done this one. But they don't, so I didn't. I decided I'd avoid hepatitis. But I got to see these piercings and a couple people getting their tongues pierced together and dancing. And it's so tempting to include all of that because it's so interesting. But it's like, if something is so interesting, it deserves its own paragraph, or its own essay, or its own novel, whatever it develops into. So I got seduced by this variety of interests that I have, and the luck that I had in having these encounters, to mixing it up a little too much. This was mostly pretty good, though I really shouldn't have included the guys with the double flute and the drum. Otherwise, everything fits. That was okay. And I don't feel like the humor was condescending with the guys who were genuinely funny. I mean, years later I ran into the guy who tried to leave the screen. And he was real excited to see me. He had a good time that day. So this brings back great memories for me, which means nothing to you as viewers. Now I want to hear back from you about these pieces of something which can be a finished whole, because I still have, I have weeks of footage. And I have great interviews. For instance, the good clarinet player, that the band with the dynamic drummer who looked like he should be like the Bombay Elvis, this guy. The clarinet player in there was a serious musician. He was really good, and he talked a lot about his disappointment in not being. And he had to quit music school at MSU to support his family, so he did this instead. And he's recorded quite a bit, but he just didn't get to live the music life that he wanted to. So I've got a really great interview about that, which would be a fitting piece of the movie. I've got a parallel interview with the band. Did you notice the one that had Udaipur on the side? And it had this guy. The guy that runs that is an incredible musician from a musical family. His father played in 50 countries. That wedding cart had a violin seat inside the cart, and his son was playing electric violin. And these guys could play. And they had maybe, I think, 12 different sets, basically. So they had uniforms and setups for 12 different kinds of performances. And one of them happened to be where I got grabbed into the ring and the sweaty guy was dancing with me. That was the nastiest hug I've ever experienced in my life. It's like, oh. And a side story, the conditions we could tell were deteriorating. So we knew something was going to happen because some of those guys were really drunk. So we said, look, we got to get out of here because something's going to happen and we don't really want to be part of it. And it turns out something did. the driver of one of the vehicles backed into the uncle of the bride and knocked him down. And the uncle of the bride he was Jane, but he slapped the guy anyway. And I thought, I do wish we'd stayed if I'd known it would have been that manageable. But these stories that go with it are probably worth asides to tell the story, because this is, and I tried to keep it personal, because you know it's Ben in there, where he turned and took a photo of the person taking a photo of him, which is one of the routines we do. So like when strangers ask for a picture of me, I say, okay, 10 rupees. So it's part of this approach. But I think in a movie like this, it's important to keep us in there, because we're in there. And people aren't behaving the way they would if we weren't there. They're close, but they're also a little bit more gets directed towards us or away, depending on the self-consciousness. And I think I might finish it. There's a lot more there, and I love it. So I think I should finish it. So talk to me.
So, did you focus on Gujarat only or a particular area?
Well, Gujarat, because that's where we were located, and there was a lot going on right then. But we also spent some time in Udaipur, which was the best and worst bands were there. So that was.
And I was just wondering, you said you were going to road.
Oh, okay. The question was that I just responded to, did we just focus on Gujarat?
And in terms of, you said in your proposal, you put your position, and I was wondering what that position was and how that sort of evolved.
Well, my position was that this is a vanishing form. It's being, even then you could tell it's being edged out by big speakers and DJs. And my unspoken position was that I loved it. And I think that's got to be there too, because if you just go from a formal position, I didn't repeat the question. The question was about the position that I put forward in my proposal. So it was about capturing this form before it went away. And my rationale was that it's super under-recorded. I think that was even in the title. It just hasn't, nobody's paid much attention to it. The one book that's written about it describes the wedding bands as the garbage men of Indian ritual music. And it's like, I love the smell of that garbage. I wanted to get that. So I got as much of it as I could. And then as I was editing, I lost track of my goal. And I ended up wanting to make more of kind of a video tone poem about the experiences. And some of those scenes in there do that pretty well, I think. These guys, I love this. They're combing their hair for us, and of course some of those images, like where the guy turns and his tuba doesn't have a mouthpiece, so he's just a prop. I love that, and there are a couple others. So that's potential, and I could do a short one of those. 12 minutes? I don't know, that'd be pretty interesting. But I think the valuable thing to do would be to complete it with my original intentions and include the interviews. And if I get lucky and have enough time in the next month, go back and catch up with some of these same people. I still know where they are and can easily get in touch with them. That one scene where they're playing that pretty high-class music in the street, where they're playing really well together and those guys all have technique. One of the saxophone players I had gotten to know, and he came over and we did a couple sessions together. And I wish I'd done video of that. This was really interesting. And it fits how the music fits together. My friend Chirag, who you see walking with my daughter in one of those last scenes, is like a super percussionist. So he was playing electronic drums, I was playing bass, and Arvind was playing saxophone. And Arvind originally wanted to be a guitar player, and he loved actually some of the same stuff I love, which is that noir-sounding Bollywood music from the 60s, right around 1960. He loves that stuff. So I said, well, play one you really like. So he played it. I said, well, okay, let's stick with that scale and we'll improvise. And he played the same thing over again. And so Chirag and I found a groove and played it. And then I said, well, let's try it again, but this time play from the scale. And he played the song again. And we picked a different groove. So we ended up with him playing basically the same thing maybe 4 times, and Chirag and I playing these different grooves. And without asking the question, you guys learned to improvise, I found out. But it was fascinating. And they all sound good, you know. But it was just a different approach. And it turns out he loved guitar more than saxophone, but couldn't find work. So when we left, I gave him my guitar. I would buy a guitar when I come to India, so I'd have one to play. I mean, he has, well, by now the neck's probably like this because of the humidity, but it worked pretty well when I gave it to him. I wish I had that on there. I think that would be a decent fit. Questions? Other questions?
What was the make of your guitar?
What was the make of my guitar? I think it was a Gibson. You know what I'm talking about. I saw one at the flea market that literally the neck was like this. And I wanted to buy it just to have it and have it in my house and look at it for a while and then leave it on the curb somewhere. But
They sound pretty good.
it does sound good. And actually the fretboard came off, and I got some glue and some clamps, and I used the railing of my balcony as a straight edge, and I clamped it overnight, and it held up the rest of the time. It was fine.
Is there, you mentioned that there's a hierarchy of quality, however you define quality.
Yeah.
How does that work? Does it mean that a richer band that can afford more instruments has a better quality? Again, however you define it. How does quality work?
Okay, did this get you? So,
Yeah.
the question, how does quality work? What does it mean in this context? And the partial answer is that what I discovered from the experience was quality is how it functions and what the final product is. So what I thought was the lowest quality band ended up being what I thought was beautiful sound design for the setting. Going down the street and ending with that sign that says hint and points off to the side. It's like I took the hint from that. The quality, as I would, like if I auditioned those musicians in a room down here, I would think, oh, sorry guys. But for that, they were perfect. So what the quality is, I think, always relative to what your context is and what the goal of the piece is. And the good clarinet player that I talked about, I think his bitterness comes through a bit in his energy. He really does know, one of his talents is how to select musicians. Like that particular drummer was one of the better musicians in the whole thing. He was great. And in that way it worked, but when it shifted over to his clarinet playing, I felt like it cooled off too much and that it lost energy. And so where's the quality there? Here's somebody that can play better than the other people in his band, but when he plays, it's worse because it doesn't have the energy that job requires. So I mean, the quality is always relative. And I'm not one to believe that there's no point in talking about quality, because I don't think everything's equal. And the people that I know who have talked like that, when they select people, they're not talking what they've said either. They're not playing the game they've described. So, but I think there's a big range of what can work, and it really depends on how things work together. That's why collaboration is so important. You fill in each other's holes, give each other ideas. Yeah, question.
Can this be a livelihood
For the wedding band players.
or are they doing multiple things?
Can this be a livelihood for the wedding band musicians? No. It's always a side thing. So like, regarding the quality of the instruments, there's a really good saxophone player that was in the same band as the guy that tried to escape the film. And I mean, that guy, he was just hired to dance around and kind of be a energy provider. But the saxophone player was really good, and his springs were gone, and he was using rubber bands for his valves. And now I wish I'd brought along a box of replacement springs and found that guy. I think he was from out by Padra, near Baroda. So he was a good musician. His equipment was terrible, and he made his living as an onion farmer, and that had been a good year for onions. So he was happy, and he also loved playing music. It's funny. It's like a lot of us. I've never made a living from playing music. I've sometimes made money from playing music, and courtesy of the Fulbright Nehru Association, I'm making money from exploring music and making instruments right now, and that's happened periodically in my life. But to do like a commercial enterprise, which I think you're asking, that's hard everywhere, unless you're a star, or you give it all up and you just do something you can't really stand. So, but short answer. I mean, anybody else want to throw in on this?
But in terms of if you were having a wedding, what would be your markers for hiring a band? Is it word of mouth? Some guys are good.
Well, that's a good question. If I had access to some of these bands, I would pick the one with the most energy. I wouldn't pick the one with the best players. I'd probably pick one where the players were good enough, and then they had that certain spark, that thing that happens. And having just played in a wedding, my marker, of course, in that case is the top quality, but me playing guitar. You know, I played for my daughter's wedding, and my ex-wife and her husband and my brother-in-law played. So, it's a little joke. But yeah, I wouldn't go for pure musicianship. When my wife Wendy and I got married, her mom gave us some cash to spend, so we spent most of it on a jazz band from Kansas City, and the saxophone player was named Aladdin, and he was one of Charlie Parker's teachers. So, and he was playing with a bunch of young guys that were all good jazz players. Wow, that was a wedding band, because they had all of it. Because they had the energy, and they could play. It was really fun. Didn't you think? Yeah. I wish I could remember more of it, but... Yeah, Brian.
Yeah, is this the kind of wedding band that you're highlighting in these films and your trip? Are they the primary type of wedding band that you would find, or is it just a certain class, certain rank of
They're traditionally... Oh.
type?
So the question is I keep forgetting. The wedding bands that I'm highlighting in this set of clips, are they the typical wedding band, or are they just one out of a range of wedding bands?
Is there are these primarily street performer in sort of like their kind of ranking and
Okay.
music world, or are there wedding bands that are run by organizations that? Because I see there are Indian wedding bands in San Francisco.
Right.
And they're definitely kind of professional musicians that
Right.
get hired for social media for their families when they get married in the Bay Area.
Okay.
I don't know if there's that kind of wedding band here as well.
So the question basically is there a range of wedding bands that includes professional musicians that play all the time, and are these that I was focusing on just street oriented, basically? And I'll get back to that question about what's happening in the States. Because there's one called Red Barat in I think out of Brooklyn that has a really good dole player that I've been a little bit in touch with. Okay, so this particular kind of wedding band traditionally takes the groom to the wedding site, and they are not invited inside the wedding ground. So they're this calling them the garbage men of Indian ritual music is kind of apt because they're excluded and they're not treated very well, and they're only on the street. They don't get invited in. So regarding here in India, at least the part of India that I filmed in and I'm familiar with, that's how it goes. But then there are these, the stuff has evolved. So that in Udaipur, I think that this group does all kinds of stuff, and they probably do some parallel things to what you're talking about that happens like in the Bay Area and in the New York area, where you've got professional musicians, some of whom have come from India and some who didn't, who are playing cleaned up versions of this music that has more improvisation in it and more jazzy-like flourishes maybe, and more kind of R&B flourishes.
Yeah.
And they could be used anywhere for these wedding parties. And like Red Barat, I know from Brooklyn, plays a bunch of festivals.
Yeah, in the Presidio there are these like outdoor Indian weddings that are just go around. There'll be like a sort of marching, sort of dancing band that'll go along with it.
Yeah.
I didn't know how that related to this.
Yeah, and I'm guessing they invite them in the States, though I don't know the answer to
Yeah,
that.
probably. They probably pay quite a bit of money.
And they would have to pay a lot of money to get these guys to play, because these are top-end people. Are we done?
I believe these guys are starving.
Are you starving?
Also, they have this
Tiny.
I know.
their lunch
I know.
disappears. Someone steals it.
Oh.
Someone steals it?
They have
Right. The wedding man guys sneak in and steal the lunch.
So, any other questions?